Good day everyone, welcome back to my channel. Now today I will be doing some mod on my motherboard itself. Reason being, right, I noticed that the VRM, in fact, on this chokes itself, right, though I'm actually using the Arctic liquid freezer too. Now the temperature itself is not really that ideal. In fact, it went up to 58 all the way to 60, and for the X570 chipset itself, right, it went all the way up to 70. So I've actually observed this board itself and gonna do a solution on the back plate itself, as I know that it's actually not contacting the VRMs, which is at the top side. And on the chipset itself, right, I'll do some mods too. I'll be using this copper shim. Just let you have a look. These are actually graded 0.8 and this is actually graded 1mm. And I'll be using thermal pads, thermal paste, and to cut out the thermal pads. Let's get into it. Before I proceed explaining the mod on my motherboard itself, for those of you who are actually under 18, kindly do not proceed. And for those of you who are actually not comfortable or do not have confidence, right, kindly do not do this mode. By the way, when you're doing this mode, right, the warranty will be void. So take note on this. Now on this mode itself, right, these are the material that I've actually made use of. Mainly the thermal pads from Thermalright, based on the thickness, which is actually 1mm, 1.5 and 2.5. Using the Arctic MX5 thermal paste. Now this is actually the core material that we'll be using to absorb heat from my VRMs and the X570 chipset. This is actually the thermal tape, which I will illustrate to you later. I'll list all this material in my description if you are interested to actually do this mode on a X570 Taichi, right? Not the Razer version, but the original Taichi. You can do so. First off, I'm going to start with the back plate. I noticed that the back plate itself, right, as you can see in this diagram here, is actually not touching anything or absorbing any heat from the motherboard itself. So I was thinking that, okay, why not do a mode whereby I can actually absorb all the heat from the VRM itself to the back plate. And as you can see here, all these are the material. Now, I have done precise calculation as in like the gap. As you can see here, the gap in between is 3mm. So doing calculations like the thermal pad is actually 2.5mm thick. The copper sheet is 0.8mm thick, and the thermal tape is 0.15. So when I total this up, right, it will give me a 3.45mm thickness. So when I use this to minus off the gap itself, right, it gives me a 0.45mm to cushion, meaning to say allowing space to actually squash in between. So it will be just nice. I've actually tested this. It's not going to work at all. So first thing I did, right, I've actually cut out the protective tape on selective area. As you can see here, I've actually cut out, which I'm going to show you later on in the video, in the process. Then once I've actually done that, right, I've actually applied the thermal tape on the copper sheen. Then from there, right, I'll place the thermal pad, which is actually a 2.5mm thick, as you can see over here. taken care of the VRM beneath it, so hopefully that this will dissipate heat, and the backplate itself, right, these two areas will absorb heat and to disperse on the whole backplate itself. Now next I will be tackling on the X570 chipset, whereby I've actually done calculations over here, and this time round, right, instead of using the 2.5 mm thick thermal pad, I'm using the 1 mm thick. Reason being, right, the gap between the heatsink and the motherboard itself is 3 mm, and the die height is 1.6 mm. Then followed by the calculation of the thermal pad, which is 1 mm. The copper shim is 0.8, and the Arctic MX5 paste itself, right, give or take 0.1 to 0.2 mm. In fact, when it's squashed, right, I think it's less than 0.1, probably about 0.5. So when I calculate out everything, right, through this calculation here is actually 3.5 mm. And as I mentioned, the gap over here is actually 3 mm. So if I have to minus off, right, give and take, it'll be 0.5 mm for me to cushion between the copper seam and the die itself, and I don't think it will actually crush the chip. Now as for the top part of the heatsink itself, whereby it touches the cover, or should I say the armor cover for your M.2 itself, right, the gap between the heatsink and the cover itself is actually 2 mm, as I've actually stated over here. Now the thermal pad I'm using right now is in fact a 1.5 mm thermal pad. Reason being, right, after putting the MX paste, as you can see here, then the copper sheen itself, which I'm using 0.8 again, and to add up with the thermal pad 1.5, giving you total of 2.4. And if I were to minus off the 2 mm, right, it will give you a 0.4 mm thick to cushion and to contact, which is just nice, whereby all your M.2, right, will sit flush to all this thermal pad. By the way, these are all the 1 mm thermal pad. So I will show you how I actually did it on the video itself. Mode is completed and it's time to put this to a test and to show you the results. Before I do so, this is actually the system I've been using. Now, I've actually migrated from an Intel platform to a AMD platform. That was like 5 months ago. All this while I'm actually using this platform. Processor wise, I'm using the AMD Ryzen 9 5950X. The AIO cooler, I'm using the Arctic Liquid Freezer 2 280 series. RAM wise, I'm using the Corsair Dominator Platinum, which is actually a 32 gig kit with DRAM frequency of 3200. GPU, I'm using the ASRock RTX 3080 overclock TUF. Motherboard wise, I'm using the ASrock X570 Taichi. Storage wise, I'm using 3x1TB Seagate Firecooler 520M.2 Generation 4 SSD. Power supply, I'm using the Silverstone SFXL 850 watt Platinum. Chassis wise, I'm using the Lianli O11D Mini, and during this build I've bought additional component from Lianli, which is actually the GPU vertical mounting bracket that comes along with the PCIe 4.0 extension cable. This allows me to mount my RTX 3080 GPU vertically in the case itself. Now, for radiator fans and case fans, I've made use of all Arctic fans. Basically 2 Arctic P14s on my radiator and 7 case fans, which is the Arctic P12. The arrangement of the case fans as listed here: top will be 3 exhausts, bottom 3 intake, and rear 1 exhaust. Moving on is the configuration of my UEFI, or should I say the BIOS in my motherboard itself, just to show you. Now, I've not done any manual overclocking on this processor itself. The only thing that I touch is actually the PPO2 and also the X.M.P profile. As you can see here, I've set it to X.M.P 2.0, then leaving this frequency and the voltage as default, and I've actually manually keyed the Infinity Fabric frequency as 1600 due to the fact that my DRAM frequency is actually 3200. Now, next will be the PPO2. I've actually set it to advanced. As you can see here, all the settings like the PPT, TDC, and the EDC itself, right? There is no change on PPT and the EDC itself. I use default. The only thing I changed is actually the TDC to 110 because I want it to actually stay constantly at either 3.8 or 3.9 gigahertz, and the boost will be actually at 4.6. Now, I did something on the curve optimizer, and I noticed that for core 6 and for core 8, I can't go below -4, which is -5, -6. I can't do that, so I stay as -4. And for the rest, right, I've set it to 6. I know that this processor can do much better, but it's just that I want stability, so I just leave it all as 6. Moving on with the fan configuration. This is the fan configuration which I've set for my radiator, 2x140mm Arctic P14. And the SB fan 1, right, known as the Southbridge fan, which is supposed to be the X570 Chipset fan, I've set to performance mode. Now, the top, the bottom, and the rear fan itself, right, they have the same configuration as you can see here. This is actually my top fan, this is my bottom, and this is my rear. Now, do take note that all this configuration was done. In fact, it has been using it. I've not changed it before I did the mode. After I've done the mode, right, I'm still using the same old setting. Now, I've actually taken numerous of tests based on Cinebench, and this was the result. Most of the time, I use the same result. And worse is actually when I use the PC itself, right, to do my work, such as 3D rendering and compilation of videos. All this temperature will go up. And this was before I did the modification on my motherboard itself. As you can see, the CPU temperature is 76. Yeah, no big deal. People might be saying that it can hit 80. But sitting close to my case, which is actually beside me, I feel like I'm sitting in a sauna or in an oven. The X570 chipset itself, right, has rose to 71 degrees. Sometime will go up all the way to 80 degrees. It's very terrible. Motherboard itself will stay at 54 at max load. Now, the two VRMs, as you can see here, right, one is actually 52, the other one is 61. Reason being, right, my Arctic Freezer, Liquid Freezer 2 has this VRM fan that blows in one of the VRM itself. So that's why one of the temperature is lower than the other. but somehow it's still very high. Now, my M.2 drives is actually what I'm worried about, because the temperature is like over 56 and 60 and sometimes 63. The RAMs itself is also horrible, 50 and 51. I wouldn't know why it's actually heating up that much. As you can see, the core clock that I'm actually using is 3.925. So right now I'm going to take you to my setup and I'm going to do the test and benchmark and to tell you the results. Now, as you can see here, I've actually done all the setup properly, and if you to notice, right, I have a temperature over here, which you can see is actually room temperature 30 degrees Celsius right now, and my casing itself, just to show you, is covered, it's not open. And looking on my dashboard itself, right, you will see that this is actually blocking the Cinebench itself. So later on I will be zooming into this. And do take note that I've actually passed the idle time, so the CPU temperature is actually running at 65. Reason being, I'm running off this live cam here, inclusive of the recording from my video editing program. So that's why it's actually running on 65 and so. The X570, right, known as the SB soft bridge, which is running at a temperature of 54 degrees Celsius or 54.5 degrees Celsius. Then my motherboard is actually hovering at 39. Then the VRMs itself, right, or the VRAMs is actually running on 43 for 1 and 2. Now, as I mentioned, there are differences here. Now, this is actually 43, this is 46. Reason being, right, the 43 is actually being blown by my Arctic VRM fan itself. Now, these are all my M.2s, the first three. So you can see that this is actually 39. The rest two is actually 43 and 43. This is actually seated below, or should I say right behind my GPU itself. So that's why it's actually hotter. Then this is actually my RAMs, followed by the core clock, which later on you will see probably it will jump to 3.9 or above. Then this is actually the voltage that it will pull, followed by the CPU package, or should I say drawn power. Then the core usage itself, right, once I start Cinebench, right, this will hit 100. Having to say it's actually testing on multi-core, because I heavily use on multi-core itself. Now, if you can notice here, this is actually the CPU TDC, the PPT, and the EDC. As mentioned to you on my BIOS itself, right, this is PPT I've actually set to 142 by default. Then TDC is actually on 140, and EDC, right, no wait, wrong. The PPT I've actually set it by default 142 from AMD specs of the 590-50X. The EDC itself is actually 140, then followed by the TDC. I've actually changed it to 110. Later you'll see it when it's actually full loaded. Temperature on my GPU, well, nothing much. This standard, when I run this Cinebench, right, this might not affect much. This is actually the CPU drawn. So let me just start testing. It's going to be a 30 minutes run, so I start running it. So right now it's actually running. Now do take note that my room temperature is 30.9 K live. Oh, let me switch off the lights. So as you can see here, this will raise. I will leave it to run for 30 minutes and I'll be back. Okay, test about to end, and I'm going to do a second test, another 30 minutes run. Now do take note that besides the benchmarking on the Cinebench 23, right, I'm actually running the load with the live camera over here, as you can see, showing you the temperature and the time itself. And underneath it, right, I'm actually running the video editing program where I record this down, so this will add into the load. Somehow the temperature, it doesn't goes beyond of what I've actually previously experienced. It's going to end right now. Then I will run the test again, just for the sake of verifying that the case mode, or should I say the motherboard mode, helps. Okay, stop, and I'm going to run the test again. Now, 28 minutes have passed, and this is actually a result. I like what I'm seeing. As you can see that my CPU never hit more than 71 and above, which previously it hits more than that. And on the South Bridge itself, or should I say the X570 chipset, right, it's hovering around 55 degrees to about 55.6 around there. So I'm pretty happy with it. At least it's not shooting up to 70 degrees or maybe 80 degrees. Same goes to my motherboard, never hit above 42 or 43. Then these are the VRMs on the motherboard itself. One is actually hovering at 47, the other one is actually hovering on 56. And my M.2 drives consistently either 40 or 44 degrees, never hit more than that. And my RAMs here, as you can see, it never hit more than 50, which is good. Then I'll be actually cutting out all these diagrams here, which I've actually done a screenshot earlier on, and to show you the comparison of before and after with the two screenshots. In fact, before this, right, I've actually done a screenshot, and the second run I done another screenshot, and I'll talk to you guys more about my thoughts about modding the motherboard itself, and with some other consideration when I'm doing this mode. I believe live capture or screenshot will tell you 1,000 words. Now, as compared to all the temperature over here, you can actually pause this video and have a look. This is before I did the mode, and this was after when I did the mode, which I tested the first 30 minutes. As you can see here, all the temperature here is so much lower compared to this. Having said so, right, I did another 30 minutes. This is actually the second 30 minutes. Look at the temperature. See? So it tells that my mode worked. Now, I deliberately took screenshot from my hardware info 64. As you can see here, I'm taking all the max temperature as I've actually rectangle them. Now, the CPU itself, take a look. It's actually running max at 72.9, but most of the time it's actually hovering about 67, 68, 69, around there. And you never go always consistently at 70 or 71, things like that. See, look at the cores over here. They are pretty healthy. And the motherboard itself consistently is actually 41 degrees. For some reason it stays there. And for the X570 chipset, right, it's actually running max at 55.5 and never go beyond that. Now, looking at my VRMs itself, take a look. It doesn't hit more than 60 degrees. And for my RAMs, these are my RAMs, it never go beyond 50, which previously went all the way up to 50 plus, and was like, you must be kidding me. And my M.2 drive, see, it's very good temperature. It doesn't go beyond 50 degrees, which is good. Now, reason for this, right, I believe that why this work is because that your backplate of your motherboard is actually absorbing all the heat, so that those heat, right, is actually not accumulated inside the case itself. I mean the front side of the motherboard itself. If you do that, right, that will actually affect all the areas, things like the motherboard, the VRM, the RAMs itself, and especially the M.2s itself. They run very hot. So this tells you that it works. Now, as I mentioned to you, right, if you're not confident to do this mode, and if you unsure what to do, please do not do it. Reason being, right, it will void your warranty. Second, you might damage the board if you do not know what you're doing. Let me just show you over here. Now, I'm not so worried of you modding the back plate itself on the motherboard itself, so long you take the description over here. Now, the cushion itself, right, I've actually done a research. You need approximately about 0.4 to 0.5 thickness of the pad in order for you to actually have something to bite on the heatsink or the copper sheen with your die or chip. But somehow on this backplate itself, right, as I mentioned, I'm not so worried, because if you were to follow this, right, it should be fine. Now, the thing that you need to take note on is actually on the X570 chipset. If you go beyond this thickness itself, right, if you go 3.8 or 4, right, you might crush the die itself. So do take note on this. As I mentioned, if you do this mode, right, you might damage certain things, and I won't be responsible for it. And also another thing is that your motherboard will be void for warranty, so take note on this. Alright, I hope you guys have actually enjoyed what I've shown you, and for those of you who are actually new, right, and you like my content, do remember to subscribe and to click on the notification bell button. Till then, take care, goodbye, see ya.